Are you interested in looking for an update on the seafood industry, where it's at from a conservation perspective? This is the episode for you because I have on Ryan Bigelow, who's the Director of Projects for the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions, who's here to talk about the seafood industry in general. It talks about the alliance, who's part of the alliance, what industry, the industry part that's part of the alliance, as well as the nonprofit organizations, the NGO part. We're going to talk all about that, why this exists, his experience with the Seafood Watch program from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We talk everything seafood, and it's a great episode. So let's start the show. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And this episode is for you seafood lovers out there, or people who are interested in seafood and where the industry is at in terms of conservation. Conservation is a big focus when we talk about fisheries, and overfishing is a huge issue. One of the biggest issues that we face in the ocean, whether it be coastal or high seas. It's something that we have to be careful of. We have to make sure that when we buy seafood, we buy it properly. And sometimes the information is not really out there that we need. All the information that we need to make a conscious purchase is not really out there. And today I talked to Ryan about that. I talk about from a consumer perspective. I also talk about fisheries from and seafood from an industry perspective. And it's a great episode. I want to get right into the interview. Here is the interview with Ryan Bigelow, Director of Projects for the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about seafood and conservation in general? You ready to start this?
I am, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
You bet. This is going to be a load of fun. I'm looking forward to this. I was reached out on these are one of the things where I love about podcasting is people reach out to me all the time and they're like, "Hey, would you like to speak to this person? Would you like to speak to that person?" And I'll be honest, I get a lot per day, and they have nothing to do with ocean conservation. In fact, some people, they don't even look at what it is. They look at ocean like, "Oh, we want to talk about oil and gas." And I'm just like, "No, please, God, no, not from an oil and Zach." But I was really happy that your team reached out, because to be able to talk about seafood and sort of the work you do at the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions is really, one of the big things that we need to talk about in conservation with the ocean. So super happy that you're here today. And I'm looking forward to we're going to talk about all these different things, from human rights to illegal fishing, to how we can, source out goods like sustainable seafood, use the apps like Seafood Watch and Ocean Wise and all this kind of stuff. So we're going to get into all that. But before we do, Ryan, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. My name is Ryan Bigelow. I am the project director at the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions, or just the Alliance because the name is much too long. I have a really cool job. I work at the Alliance, which is about 150 NGOs and businesses in 22 or so countries around the world, all dedicated to improving the sustainability of seafood. And so my job is to get them together, pick the experts from that organization to come together on a topic, say, how are we going to improve fisheries? How are we going to address social responsibility in seafood? How are we going to do any of these topics? I get to pull the experts together, facilitate conversations, and really be a fly on the wall when these very intelligent people come together to make decisions about how we should best move forward in our industry. So I would say I'm very well versed in all of these topics, and I am on friendly terms with most of the experts. So I get to pull it together and just sort of put my name on the things they create. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. And I'm looking forward to talking more about that. But let's go back a little bit into your story.
Sure.
We were just talking about before we recorded, we were just kind of laughing how, when you get into learning and wanting to be a marine biologist or go into marine conservation, we don't always, the first thing that comes to mind, unless you're already in the seafood, your family's already in, or you have friends who are already in the seafood industry, you don't really think about working in seafood. So how did that journey sort of end up you being here with the Alliance?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I had no interest or understanding of seafood when I got into environmental policy in my graduate program. But I was actually overseas. I was a translator and interpreter in Japan.
Wow.
Was living there, and just through luck, really, I was able to be an interpreter during the World Expo, which was all environmentally themed, and it was great. And you're looking at that next level of professional interpretation, and if your language is Japanese, it's almost all car parts or patent law. That's where the money is. it just broke my soul to think about it. I've done that kind of thing, and it is painful. So I switched. I said I'm going to follow my heart. I was married at that point. My wife and I came back to the States. I ended up in Monterey, California. There's a very famous interpretation school there that also has a program in environmental policy.
Okay.
Did 2 years there, getting my master's degree. And at the end of it, my wife said, I stuck with you. Now I want to stay here. That's my ask. She said, I did 2 years of you studying in school. So now I want to stay here. So I had to find a job. And I ended up at Seafood Watch at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is a sustainable seafood organization, probably the best known consumer
Yeah,
facing organization in the world.
that's fair.
And I got to work with them for 10 wonderful years. Just a wonderful group of people. Some of my best friends are there. Some of our mutual friends are there.
Yeah, yeah.
And just a great, great program. So, and from there, I moved to the Alliance, of which Seafood Watch is a member. So it's still the same community, still similar work, just with a broader audience now.
Going back to your work at Seafood Watch,
Mm-hmm.
just being in the area, you're just like, I'm going to look for a job, but you obviously had the environmental sustainability and environmental policy background.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Monterey Bay, wherever you look at it, whether it's the aquarium side, whether it's the research side, the Seafood Watch, like the conservation applications, the plastic work that the plastic pollution
Mm-hmm.
work that they do, it's pretty much world renowned institute, right? It's not just an aquarium as many people think. It's really pretty much they're on the cutting edge of a lot of
Yeah.
different aspects of conservation. Getting a job there is a big deal. It's not easy to get in. You have to know what you're doing, and to be able to stay there for 10 years just in this business alone is a testament to the work that you do. What would you sort of give in terms of like the reasoning for staying for so long at a place like this? Because in conservation we move around quite a bit. Usually it's funding.
Yeah.
Obviously
Yeah.
Seafood Watch is well funded, but
Yeah.
what was the reasoning to stay around? Did you enjoy it that much? You said it was a
Oh,
community, but
it's I can't even begin to describe how amazing it is to work in an aquarium. Like the experiences I was able to have there, and we've talked briefly. White sharks in the wild.
yeah.
Penguins in the hallway. This is. It sounds like a scene from a bad movie, but on my first day when I showed up to do my paperwork, I had on a suit, which no one at the aquarium wears suits, but I didn't know.
Right. Yeah.
I just got in from Japan, where that's all you wear,
Yeah.
and I got on an elevator with a guy in full diving gear and chainmail.
Oh, right. Of
And
course.
it was just
Yeah.
one of these awkward, hey,
Yeah.
hey, the elevator silence. I'm like, this is the coolest place I'll ever work. And so it was, I got to do all sorts of things, travel all over the world. So not leaving was not a problem. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Getting in
Yeah.
the door is a more difficult thing.
Yeah.
And I think when you do that, my advice to everyone whom I
Hmm.
ever speak to young folks, is make sure your skills are broad. So, for example, in my case, I had done quite a bit of comms work for my graduate school, social media, other things. I also had served as an interpreter, as I said, and a translator,
Yeah.
so I was bilingual.
Yeah.
At that time, the aquarium was really looking at Japan, so I was able to run with a lot of that work where no
Gotcha.
one else could.
Yep.
So if I could craft the perfect young candidate right now, of course, you have to have that marine background. You don't have to be a marine biologist. I am not.
Right.
But you have to know some science. You have to know something about the field. Speak another language if you can pull it off.
Gotcha.
Spanish, Indonesian, Chinese.
Yeah.
If you want to get into seafood, those are great languages. Um, yeah, and have some other skills that you bring to the table. Be ready to run with anything. That would be my advice for
Yeah.
young
Because
folks.
it's an interesting program too. It's not your typical sort of conservation program. It's
Right.
you not only deal with people all around the world. Because I remember I had somebody on from I think Sarah was on, quite our mutual friend Sarah McDonald, and
Mm-hmm.
we talked about the Seafood Watch program and what goes into putting together all the different aspects of what
Right.
Seafood Watch is, what to avoid, what to go for, what's a good alternative, and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's a big data crunching thing, but it's also, as the program has expanded worldwide, you need to be able to speak to people from all over the world, from
Right.
every different professional background. It's not just fishers, it's not just government. Can you just talk to a little bit about your experience with it? I mean, obviously, being an interpreter and knowing Japanese is a huge thing, and as you said, moving into to Japan was probably a big asset for you. But what was like your day to day life in terms of work wise there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When I started, I was doing a lot of communication, social media, and quickly moved into working with the Japanese programs, and then working directly with the scientists, like again our mutual friend Sarah, to take these. We gave it to report on, say, tuna,
Hmm.
um, and translating what is a 140-page report, peer-reviewed report, into a line or two on those pocket guides. So those,
Right.
you've seen those, the paper guides,
Yeah.
those, or the app, all that language. Those were my babies for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of my tenure there. And you have to translate that, and you have to
Hmm.
take really complicated language and boil it down.
Yeah.
And as we talked earlier a little bit about, have another skill, that's pretty general feedback, but being able to interpret scientific information into plain speak is a really powerful, and I would
Yeah.
say not very not very common skill in our field.
Hmm.
And so if you
Hmm.
can do that, I mean, jumping around a little bit, but you look at something like how poorly in many ways we failed to communicate the issue of climate change early on. How
Yeah.
much in 50 years are we going to talk about that as being one of the great failures of the scientific movement, that we failed to really articulate to the average American, mostly, but the average human, how big of a
Right.
deal this
Right.
is, right? So that communication, that interpretation of data into just common language is really powerful.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of my day-to-day work. I also traveled around, like I said, quite a bit. They were trying to build the sustainable seafood movement rather in Japan, so we supported
Hmm.
that quite heavily, and just a great job. And then you get to have meetings in the aquarium, which of
Yeah.
course is lovely.
It's always wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
I try to get a meeting, a user group meeting for my work that I work my day job, which is outside in the Monterey Bay Aquarium. That was my goal, but
Oh,
it didn't work out. That was my big thing, big push.
don't give up.
And it was on Ocean's Day. It didn't work out,
Oh,
unfortunately, but that would have been perfect. But so going to a place like Japan, where seafood is a very big part of the culture
mm-hmm,
there. They've had their ups and downs, let's say, with international sort of reputation with
mm-hmm,
seafood management, especially going everything from mussels and oysters and shellfish to whales, right? We
mm-hmm.
and we know the background on there. Uh, when you first reached out, or first part of that, building that program and helping the team build out that program, what was the reception that you got to work, to have like to build up the relationships, to work with others
Yeah.
to develop sort of sustainable field? Because I would imagine, like, a place like Seafood Watch coming into a country where maybe they don't know much about you probably have to educate them on what the app is doing and what
Mm-hmm.
its purpose is and so forth. But you're basically saying, yeah, we're going to evaluate you. We're going to audit your fisheries, and then we're going to say what's good and what's not. And that's what we're going to recommend. So there's a bit of that conflict there, which,
Yeah.
fishing communities and the seafood industry probably doesn't like. How is that facilitated to make it look like, hey, we're in for the best of it? We want you guys to have great fisheries. We want to recommend it to people. We just want to make sure that they're safe.
That's a great question, and I'd say that right off the bat, I can't go to Japan. It doesn't matter how good my Japanese is. I can't go there and tell them what they should do.
Right.
I mean, not only is that not appropriate, and
Hmm.
our movement, I would say overall, and I would just mean the seafood movement, but I'd say environmental movement overall, has a real colonial history that we really need to deal with. And guys that look like me, sitting
Yeah.
behind desks in California, should not be going to other countries and telling them what to do with their fisheries. And we, with a lot of guidance from the very top of our organization, Julie Packard, Jen Dianto Kimmerly, who leads the Seafood Watch program, or did at that time, um, really pushed for me to support the players on the ground there. There were a
Hmm.
lot of, or there was at least one staff member there who continues to lead the movement, but was a former Greenpeace employee.
Okay.
And so when you go to Japan specifically, there's a lot of bad blood towards NGOs,
Right.
because they associate them all with Greenpeace and the anti-whaling campaigns.
Right.
But this particular individual, his name was Wakao, a wonderful, wonderful guy. You should definitely have him on your show.
Yeah.
So charismatic, he's really led the movement. And so what I was able to do was go there and introduce our program, not to the general public, but to him. And he could
Mm.
take the pieces that he wanted that worked for where Japan is in where they are in their um, journey towards sustainability, right? It wasn't,
Gotcha.
we've started earlier, so we're further ahead, but it's the same path.
Hmm.
And so did not go there with solutions, did not go there and say thou shalt do anything. It was just, here are all the resources we have available. I took scientists with me from the Seafood Watch program. We translated all our materials into Japanese and taught a course on how we do the science, and they took what they
Okay.
needed.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not an export of our system. It's a let's go and be supportive, and
So
that mentality is throughout the entirety of our work there.
So it's more of sharing resources and then
Sharing
saying, "Hey, how
resources.
can you share resources with us? And then we can help you. Like we can be that resource for you to build out that program. And then we'll just
Yeah,
display the data or incorporate that
exactly.
into our thing." I gotcha. I gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. That's awesome. Now, 10 years at Seafood Watch, you probably learned quite a bit,
Hmm.
building a program, helping to build the program in Japan. And I'm sure at the same time, there are other programs being built during those 10 years. I mean, the expansion has been huge from little pamphlets to the app now, which
Hmm.
holds a lot of information. I still
Does.
don't know how you all get through all that information and sort of bring it down to one or two lines, as you mentioned before.
Yeah.
But you must have, being 10 years into, you must have gained a very good expertise in what the seafood industry is like,
Yeah.
just in terms of general, from everything from data to relationships with different countries and different organizations, to just in general, where you're just seeing the good and the bad of the seafood industry. There's a lot of issues that pop up, some that are in control and some that are out of control. Most of them are out of control, like to the individual. What did you learn most, just good and bad, if you can maybe name some example, like a good and bad example, with your 10 years at Seafood Watch?
Yeah. I don't know if I can limit it to just my 10 years in seafood. It's been a
Of
part of this
course.
job, but no, it's
Yeah,
still.
yeah.
I would say the thing that's been most striking to me um, is the complexity of the seafood supply chain. It
Mm,
is one of the, if not the most globally traded commodity. I don't think most people understand that the
right.
fish that you eat might have literally been caught by someone in a kayak.
Hmm.
That person might be illiterate. That person might only pursue technology might be a cell phone. Um, that might have been farmed in the middle of Vietnam. It could be coming from anywhere,
Yeah.
and the number of hands that touch it before it reaches your plate, the amount of work that it takes to get you a bag of shrimp at the prices we're willing to pay is crazy. I mean, the complexity of it is you will
Yeah.
see pieces of fish that are caught in Alaska, flown to China, or boated to China, and then come back on boats, and things, just the complexity is beyond that. And then that's even before you start to include the complexity of the worker supply chains, meaning,
Hmm.
where are the people who work on the boats frequently are not of the country,
Right.
maybe, of the boat. The boat might not be fishing in its own international waters. We might be
Right.
leasing fishing rights from another country. That's very common. And
Yeah.
so it's just an absolute chain. It's a complex chain. And you think that you're talking to these buyers from, giant corporations that are buying tons and tons of seafood, or, whatever number it is. They often don't know exactly where their seafood's coming from either. And that
Hmm.
complexity has always been striking to me.
Yeah, that's really, and I think I agree with you. I feel like when we talk about seafood to the general public, we fail to. I mean, I guess that's not fail. We just don't go into the complexities because it's difficult to
Right.
explain how how far some of these fish will travel,
Yep.
and how, like you said, how many hands they'll go through on the business side as well as on the processing side.
Mm.
And it can be very difficult. Then you get the quota systems, and the sort of the local sort of economy, and sort of how they deal with their fishers to the consumers and things like that.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that gets lost within that
Yeah.
part. And that's hence why, like, Seafood Watch has been such an integral role. Things like the MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council,
Hmm.
and a lot of other programs ocean-wise here that we have in Canada that
Hmm.
look at the chain, the supply chain of where these fish go, and that makes a big difference in terms of how fish are considered, why fish are considered great, and why fish are not considered great.
Right.
Um, so that's it. So it's interesting. So the complexities. Now, would you say that's a good thing or a bad thing that you learned about the fisheries? I guess it could be both, right?
Yeah, well, I do. Yeah, that's a excellent. I think that it does tend to be a negative.
Yeah.
True sustainability. whatever, however you choose to define that. And we have no legal definition here in the United States. But if you're
Right.
looking at human rights, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, all of those issues require good, clean data, and it's just hard to get.
Yeah.
And it's very easy. I'm gonna sound like a corporate shill here, but please hear me out. It's very easy to think that there is some corporation someplace that is just evil and nefarious and wants to buy these products for as cheap as they possibly can. But the reality is, there might be companies that don't care enough, or as much as
Hmm.
there certainly are companies that should do more, but often they don't know how to do it. They don't have the resources to do it in house. It's very difficult to do it because they don't have relationships beyond the next chain, the next link in the supply chain. Right? They don't know the person after that. And then when you add to that, who's going to pay for that work? Are we
Yeah.
willing in the United States to not be able to buy all you can eat shrimp? Are we willing to do that? And those become hard questions.
Yeah. And I think there's also I would say one of the things that I've learned with from seafood, just sort of the industry in general, is I feel on the consumer side, we very much feel that we should be able to eat any fish from anywhere and around the world.
Mm-hmm.
If I live close to Toronto, Burlington, Ontario, there's something that's like, oh, a sea bass would be amazing,
Mm-hmm.
but right beside the Great Lakes, as you grew up right around the Great
I
Lakes, like
did.
we have a lot of good, healthy fish in there that we could, well, we used to anyway, that could eat, we could eat. And why aren't we having local fish? Why,
Right.
I'm in Toronto. Should I be having Atlantic or even Pacific salmon? Is that really what I need, or I should just focus on the local? Because that's what we used to do, is just focus on the local. But now with all the shipping and everything, and you think
Mm-hmm.
you incorporate climate change aspects and transportation, and again, seafood fraud, that's hit. There's so many problems with that. Just from the consumer's standpoint, it's like, should we be eating, like from an ethical standpoint, should we be eating things that are shipped in, rather than
Yeah.
just sort of more local fish or local seafood that we can have, right? um
Yeah.
is that something that's common, that in your sort of dealings, not beyond Seafood
Yeah.
Watch, but even with the alliance, that's a question that comes up?
I would say the alliance, not that particular question, because
Right.
but I do love that question. I think it's a real ethical dilemma that we all as individuals have to deal with. I'd say that I'm visiting family as we speak, and I
Yeah.
flew across the country to do it. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
I've already said, I don't know how many times I've flown to Japan. I couldn't tell you. It's
Right. Right.
30, 40, I don't know. So my carbon footprint is off the charts. So
Hmm.
what do we choose to do with our carbon budget? Right.
Hmm.
Um, as that's, well, we use that as a proxy for general sustainability, right?
Right. Of
Um,
course.
if someone said, I choose not to eat seafood for environmental reasons, I would say that may be a valid argument, depending on what you replace it with. If you go vegan,
Yeah.
you win.
Yeah. That's the
That's
ultimate.
fair.
Yeah.
But I think when coming back to your comment about do we discuss this at the alliance, I think it's more pragmatic because we're all in the business. And there's this outstanding thing I've had vegans tell me, you just shouldn't eat seafood. I'm said, that's fine if you can do it, but there are people in the world who require seafood. It is their main
Yes.
source of protein. It is their main source of nutrients for many
Hmm.
people across the world. And so, not making our seafood supply chain sustainable is not an option. There are too
Right.
many of us. We need too much protein. So you don't have to eat seafood. And again, I
Yep.
even as a seafood expert and a seafood consumer, I would say that's a valid choice.
Yes.
However, it's not that everyone can't do that. And if you're replacing it with many of the terrestrial resources, that is a very questionable decision. So
Hmm.
I'm not saying seafood's always better. That's
Right.
certainly not the case, but it
Right.
can be for certain. Now,
Yeah.
the local versus imported, or domestic versus imported conversation is also very complicated. If you can, I would say the best thing about local seafood is if you're lucky enough. For
Hmm.
example, I'm in Monterey, California.
Right.
When we were out on the Great Lakes, if you had the opportunity to actually know your fisher,
Hmm.
here in the West, we don't get a lot of it. There aren't many farmers. It's not a thing that happens
Right.
very frequently. But if you know the producer, you're going to be able to know more about your seafood.
Yes.
It doesn't mean it's good. We have all sorts of environmental problems in the United
Hmm.
States, as one example. Um, so it doesn't mean it's perfect, but it is an opportunity to start a discussion. And
Yeah.
that is probably the real power of the consumer. Is if you have a pocket guide from Seafood Watch, or you're working with Ocean Wise partners, you're going in there. You're not, no individual person can save the ocean or a species, or
Right.
your one meal is not going to sink a species, but you do have the power to sway companies with your purchases, however
Yeah.
limited that power may be.
Yeah, no doubt, and I agree with you completely. I think you bring up some fantastic points in terms of just the choice of what you're going to go through, and what people, some choices that people have, and some choices that people don't have, right? And they're forced to have seafood as their main protein, uh,
Mm.
I guess, intake. And protein's obviously very important in our diet, for survival and maintenance. Now, going back to kind of switching to your career, we focused a lot on Seafood Watch, but now you've gone on to something still within the seafood industry
Hmm.
with the Alliance. You went from Seafood Watch to the Alliance, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And
Absolutely.
and sort of what was your reasoning and opportunity to move to here? How did that opportunity arrive, and sort of what was your thinking around moving? Because the Seafood Watch program is a good
You're
program. It's steady.
It
Uh,
is. It is. Yeah. No. And it was hard because I love all the folks at
of
Seafood
course.
Watch. They're great folks. You know, we we went through COVID together at Seafood Watch, and that was hard for I know it was hard for
Of
everyone.
course.
And we came out the other side, and I just was a little. I said I need to try something new, and
Okay.
I was already friends with the folks at the Alliance because we were members. I'd been to
Right.
all their meetings as a member rather than an employee, and they had this cool new project director position, so I jumped at it, and it's been great. I still get to work with my Seafood Watch friends. I get to see them all the time, and it feels like I've switched to a new apartment in the same complex rather than moving completely, if that analogy holds water. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
been good. It's been interesting,
Absolutely.
and I get to work more directly with the industry, which is something I didn't get to do.
Yeah, and how do you find that working with industry? Because that can, a lot of people, when they look at conservationists and they look at people who work within the seafood industry, as soon as you team up with industry, you're part of the problem. That's sort of like the, not to say that you are, but this is sort of the
No,
the the
yeah,
s-
no,
the,
it's
the
fair.
perception, right?
Hmm.
So working with industry, part of the alliance, having this alliance, is there sort of, you just have this, do you have to go in with a little bit of a negotiating chip on your shoulder for the environment, so to speak? Or I assume the industry that you're dealing with, part of the alliance, are going to be more environmentally focused because that's why they're part of this alliance.
All of those things are true. Yeah. So we have a publicly stated conservation bias, right? Like we
Gotcha.
we we lean towards that.
Yeah.
So and if you want, the alliance is free to everyone in the movement, NGOs, businesses alike. Um, the only thing that they have to do is agree to join in good faith and share our vision of a more sustainable ocean. So, meaning all the waterways in the world, right?
Yeah.
So, in that sense, at the very least, these companies have to show up, um, having stated that we're on the same side of this
Yeah.
equation. Now,
Yeah.
then when we get down to brass tacks, if I'm developing a document to guide businesses' commitments, as an example, something we
Hmm.
just developed this year. Then I bring in experts from industry. I bring in social responsibility experts from those NGOs. I bring in environmental experts. I bring in all these different people to have these conversations and let them hash out the details. And so you do get to, democracy is tough, right? And if you when you arrive in the middle, that means no one's happy, and that often feels like that's the case, right? We have to find that middle path, and that can be stressful, but necessary to move forward.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm glad that happened. So, how does the alliance work? Can you give me sort of a breakdown? I mean, you're
Sure.
director of projects.
Hmm.
You can talk a little bit about how your role is, but can you just give us sort of an idea of how the alliance works? You already said how to join, but what's
Sure.
the function of it, and then you can talk about sort of your role as director of projects.
Yeah. So we're a very small team, and what we do is, well, let me step back. When we first were formed, it was really a group of NGOs, environmental NGOs for the most part, who wanted to ensure that the companies that they were guiding, because most large businesses have relationships with
Mm,
NGOs that help them guide the sustainability, because frankly, they didn't know a lot about seafood sustainability.
right. Yeah.
And so they wanted to make sure that everyone was working from the same script, that everyone, that you couldn't partner with an NGO that was, lowering the bar and allowing for greenwashing. They wanted to come together and provide a united face for these businesses. So that was the origins of the alliance, a very North American, I'll be blunt, mostly United States with a little bit of
Okay.
Canada mixed in.
Yep.
And it's since grown to, as I said, 22 countries, 150 organizations. And they come together for a variety of things, developing guidance for the industry, a lot of closed door meetings, a lot of pre-competitive collaboration, and just, having hard conversations behind closed doors,
Hmm.
providing guidance for each other, providing opportunities to learn, more and more focusing on learning about regions. So,
Okay.
what do you need to know to be operating in Latin America? What do you need to know about, as an example, fishery improvement projects in Asia? And we'll
Hmm.
bring that together. Or if you have a presentation or you need insight onto some of your work, you can come to us and say, hey, I have this. Will you all come to my presentation? We'll promote it, we'll interpret it or translate it as is needed, and get people to the table to have these conversations. We try to do it in person when possible, but as an organization in 22 with membership across the world, we just do that once a year. But the way I would say it, the easiest way for most people to see it is, if there is a business in the United States or North America, really Canada
Hmm.
as well, that has a partnership with an NGO, that NGO is most likely a member of our organization.
Okay.
Yeah, the vast majority.
Yeah.
So they might not even know who the alliance is. You go to, I think I can say, companies like Whole Foods and others, they might not know what the alliance is, but I know that their NGO partner is our member, and that they look
Right.
to our guidance when they developed the seafood commitment for Whole Foods, as an example.
Gotcha. Which makes sense. That's what you want. You want to be that resource for these partnerships to happen, right?
Exactly.
So everybody's working very much on the same base level, and then they
Right.
can now if an NGO has a partnership, say with Whole Foods, and this NGO does a really good job with that partnership, do you take some of those lessons learned and incorporate it back into the
Oh,
guidelines?
absolutely. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
we've talked about it a couple times, this guidance document that, if I assume most of your listeners are probably, you know, science experts, or at least at the very least
They're within,
interested in the
yeah.
ocean.
We have a lot of early career and mid career and even like career scientists that listen to this. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'll admit my organization is behind the scenes. It's not quite as sexy as like the Monterey Bay Aquarium, because that's about as
Right.
sexy as it gets in our field. Um, but we do work with all those orgs. And as you say, we
Mm,
take in that guidance, we build this guidance document out. And so what you'll see is, okay, here's an organization that's killing it on X, Y, and Z, whatever those things might be,
mhm.
social responsibility. And we'll pull those examples out, anonymize them, and then make them available as real world examples for businesses. Businesses have been very clear about what they want from us, which is short guidance with real
Mm,
world examples and actionable resources. And so when a business or an NGO comes to us, those resources are freely available in
right.
multiple languages, so you can get out and get that work going.
Yeah, I mean that's the case. I think if the businesses had time and resources to do it themselves, they would have already done that. But now they need someone outside, and I like the idea of let's make it as real world as possible in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
action items, in terms of the examples, and I think that's wonderful. Now we'll go
Yeah.
into like the your director of projects. So
Mm-hmm.
what type of projects or even topics does the alliance look at when it comes to sort of the guidelines and the guidance documents for
Yeah.
the alliance or in just seafood industry in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a variety of things. We have the one we've been talking about here. The guidance document is sort of the backbone for NGO and business relationships around sustainable seafood, and we'll share it with businesses directly. But one of the chief things we say is, if you want to be successful, find an NGO to partner with. It's
Mm,
one of the chief things that's going to drive a business towards more sustainability. So we provide that guidance. We provide guidance on fisheries that want to be involved in a fishery improvement project called the FIP, which you might have heard of,
okay.
which
Yep.
is really this acknowledgement of fishery that's like, hey, we have problems, usually of the environmental sort, but more and more human rights or social responsibility related problems as well,
Yep.
that we would like to fix. The catch 22 for them is, if you have problems, most of the NGOs, Seafood Watch, Ocean Wise, others will say, don't buy that product because it's not ready yet.
Hmm.
So they'd be red rated.
Yeah.
So the FIP model allows them the opportunity to say, hey, we will get these things done by X date. So please continue to buy our products so that we have the funds to improve, because this work is really
Mm,
expensive. And as I said before, Who pays for this work is really an outstanding question that we as an industry haven't really come to terms with.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting.
we provide the guidance on how to do those. We also provide a vision for the movement about how we see the movement moving forward and how we define sustainability in hopes that other organizations will do that as well.
Hmm.
The theme across all of these documents is really the inclusion, what's the word I want to use here? Raising and social responsibility to the same level as environmental responsibility, because our roots really are on the environmental side of issues.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and what we're finding in that work, I think more and more, is a real, all of the funding, most of the original old school NGOs in the space are North American based. And that's not going to be enough moving forward. So we're really looking to diversify our membership, our leadership, get more voices in more languages to talk about these problems, because we don't
Hmm.
have all the solutions. We can't.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of that's another thing I do is we call them networks, but it's pulling together specific topics. So, for example, I have a network on aquaculture, and we just get together and talk about what these folks, what do they want to talk about, what do they want to dig in. We get the fish farming geeks in a room and just let them go at it. We have another one on Latin America that is the same thing, all translated. It's actually all done in Spanish, so they're just translating for me because I don't speak Spanish.
Right.
But we do that, and we get, what do we need? What do they need? How can we be helpful, if at all? So again, really trying to avoid any sort of colonial environmentalism and meet them on
Hmm.
their own terms, and learn as much from them as they're learning from us. So that's the kind of stuff that I do in my day to day.
Okay.
Um,
And
Yeah.
when just a question to that, when you share resources or you reach out to somebody new, either a new organization or say somewhere in Indonesia or
Hmm.
wherever, right? And you say, we have these resources, we have these guidance documents, we'd love to work with you on this. On it. Can you just tell us how that like relationship would go, or how you would broach trying to build a relationship?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So one of the biggest events for the seafood industry in North America is the Boston Seafood Show. I think it's now
Right.
called the Seafood Expo North America, but
Gotcha.
we all
I've
call
heard
it the
about
Boston
that.
Seafood. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a if you like fish, you should
It's
go.
big. Yeah.
It's big. It's big, and we have a lot of conversations that often start out rough. Seafood. You've got seafood professionals who, for them, seafood is a paycheck. It pays for their kids'
Hmm.
school. It pays for their food, and they don't want anything that threatens that industry. And so
Right.
there's a real art to hearing angry fishers or farmers, hearing their valid concerns in many cases, and then
Hmm.
finding joint ground. Like, hey, I get it. So what can we
Yeah.
do to help you improve the sustainability of your product? Because at the end of the day, if it's not sustainable, it's
It's
not
not going to do well.
it's not going to do well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of those conversations start. And then say, here are the resources. And I'll be blunt that to be able to say, all of this is free. You can join all of our conversations for free. That goes a long way. I think that
Yeah.
most groups expect that, there's some sort of money ask involved, and they're
Right.
just, that doesn't work. If everyone wants money, everyone needs money, but it builds a lot of trust to not ask for it.
And trust is a huge thing as well. I mean,
Yeah.
fishing communities and fishers and unions and so forth have had relationships with NGOs that want to create their own certification process, or I'm sure
Yes.
some that have done have been really successful, and others that have just not been successful
Yes.
one bit, right?
Hmm.
Um, how do you establish? You say you have a small team. How do you establish yourself as sort of that alliance that people should be joining? Like, how do you build that trust?
Well, I think I'm really thankful that, because by the time I had joined the organization, they were quite large already, and there was already a lot of trust built. So, I hate these slides. You'll see them a lot. We call it the logo soup, where you throw all the logos of all your members on one slide. That
Yeah.
goes, especially when I'm in Japan. They're like, I don't know who you are. I'm like, yeah, but these groups, right? They're like, oh yeah, got
Right.
it, got it, got it.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a good way to build trust. But then the other thing that we do is, when I call, so for example, the guidance for business document, we brought the business representatives in, and we ask them what they want, and their vote counts the same as the NGOs, and so they have the
Mm,
opportunity to influence the document. And then on other documents where we have disagreement, which does happen, of course, with you
yeah.
can't have 150 people in a room and not have disagreement.
Right.
I provide opportunities for them to speak at further meetings. Like, okay, here's the document, and here's a group of folks who didn't like, components X, Y, and Z, and they're going to tell you why. And that doesn't assuage all concerns, but at least they
Hmm.
feel heard, and
Hmm.
that's quite important. So,
That is definitely important. And obviously, like if you have 150 people in the room, if everybody agrees with you, you're probably not doing something right.
right,
Like
right,
for the industry, to for anything. Um, there are some major issues with fishing, like with the seafood
yes,
industry, that go beyond just overfishing. One of
yes,
those is human rights violations.
hmm
We have, the term fishery slaves is not necessarily talked about in the way that really brings it to the issue to a forefront. But
hmm
certain documentaries will bring it up every once in a
hmm
while. There will be other people who will, like, people who are in the seafood industry, I'm sure, know this quite well, and this is a big issue. Um, does the alliance deal with sort of, I guess I don't know if they call it human trafficking or fishery slaves, I guess human rights issues when it comes to fisheries? And can you just kind of give the audience sort of a breakdown of what those human right violations are?
absolutely. And we call it social responsibility, not to split hairs, but
Yeah.
because while fish slavery is certainly a thing, the absolute the enormity of issues that are everything from full on slavery to
Hmm.
gender inequity to
Right.
unsafe
Right.
working, I mean, incredibly unsafe working conditions, to indentured servants, servitude. There's all sorts of issues throughout, that it takes all different um, shapes and forms
Hmm.
of malicious behavior. And so we absolutely engage with it. And it's been a slow shift. The document that we released this year was an update of a previous document that talked about social responsibility, but it always did feel like a bit of an add-on, because frankly, it was. We'd started, again,
Yeah.
as I said, from an environmental point of view. So the inclusion of social responsibility now at an equal level, and an acknowledgement that not only do we have to find a way to fund this work and do this work, but that this work is inseparable from our environmental work, is
Hmm.
key. And it's always been that way. It's always been, we just didn't have the bandwidth or maybe the resources or the understanding of how to do it. And there were some serious missteps along the way of, one of the, I would say, using environmental tools to try to fix social responsibility issues, which they are not the same thing,
Right.
or trying to set, for example, set sort of a finish line for when you're done with your social responsibility work, when the answer is you never are. You always need to be looking at the welfare of your employees and the people involved in
Hmm.
your supply chain.
Yeah.
Um, or even little things like not understanding, that, maybe just because a child is working in one country, that might not be, child labor in the way that we would interpret it in the West. That might be the way that
Yeah.
culture interacts with children. Like, there's all sorts of things that need to be learned and understood. So, and I also want to be very clear. We're speaking in English, so I assume most of your listeners will
Hmm.
be probably in North America. Um, this is not a problem of just Southeast Asia.
Right.
We see it. We've seen it on boats in out in Hawaii, of course, in the EU, the UK, and then even if it weren't in our waters, which again it is, the fish that is caught by these individuals is often caught for our plates in
Mm.
places like Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. So it is a real issue, and some of the things that some of the solutions to these problems aren't. It's as simple as providing Wi-Fi to fishers so that they can call their families.
Yeah, because they're gone for months at a time,
Months,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So things like that. So there are things that can be done, a variety of problems, but it is absolutely central and integral to all the work we do now.
Where do you feel, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think not only just the alliance but the industry itself and tackling these social issues? Where do you think they're at? Like a 1 to 10,
One to
where would you
10.
put it
Ooh,
at? Like
ooh.
are we looking at 5? Are we looking below 5? Above 5?
My boss is going to see this, so I have to be careful. No, I would. I would say that the alliance, finally, I would say with this release of this guidance document, I'm going to be really optimistic and put us at a 6, and that
Okay.
we have included it at every level. We've publicly said
Right.
it is essential to what we believe sustainability is,
Yeah.
and acknowledging a problem and sharing a problem and outline what you think the solution is a big part towards the finish line. But that last 40% is getting it done.
Yeah,
As I
it's the
said,
implementation of it,
it's the
right?
implementation of it and getting
Yeah.
buy-in from the industry. The industry is further behind. Um, and I'm hesitant to apply a number because it really depends on the business and the fishery or the farm in question, but they have a lot of work to do. And so much of it comes down to, in a capitalist system
Mm,
where the lower the price, the better off you're going to be for the most part. Um, you're going to look for places to cut corners.
right.
And if there is a great deal of uncertainty or unknowns, as we've talked about already, it's a very difficult to track supply chain.
Yeah.
You don't know what happens to the folks. You don't know what the ladies in the peeling sheds, almost always ladies, are being
Hmm.
paid, if they're being paid. You don't know how the individuals on the boat got there, if they were allowed to
Hmm.
keep their passports, if they're allowed to call their families, if they want to be on those boats. Without that knowledge, it makes it very easy for nefarious actors to do bad things in the
Right.
name of cost
Yeah.
savings. And all of this, we haven't even talked about really, the fact that the ocean is being hit on other fronts. Like, we talk about sustainable fisheries, sustainable farming as, one of the chief drivers of ocean health. And it certainly is. I don't mean
Yeah.
to say it isn't, but climate change is out there too. The oceans are
Oh,
warming.
100%. Like
And so
faster than
it's,
ever, I
yeah.
feel
So
like.
exactly. And so even if we were doing everything right,
Yeah.
it's getting harder and harder to
It's a
fish. So
sliding scale too,
yes,
right? Yeah, you're looking at plastic pollution, you're looking at
yes,
climate change, you're looking at just water pollution in general, just
hmm,
degradation of habitats from local sort of inputs like coastal degradation, like coastal development and nutrient runoff, and
oh
we're
yeah,
seeing red tides and algal
oh yeah,
blooms and all this kind of thing. You see things get manipulated, built up islands that come out of nowhere kind of stuff. It's it's
hmm,
it's crazy to see how many things happen at the ocean, whether you're on the coastline, which is what we normally see, or whether you're on in the high seas. You just what we don't really see, and
yep,
that becomes that adds on to the challenge when you're dealing with seafood, like the seafood industry, and it makes it
yep,
a lot more difficult to sort of observe and sort of adapt to those changes and historical sort of changes. We look at I've talked about recently, especially the northern cod fishery in the Atlantic, the
oh yeah,
northwest Atlantic, and the population was decimated so much that it still hasn't recovered for a
right,
number of different reasons, and it could
right,
be climate change, it could be sort of some people say it's increase of seal population. Some like it could just be a number of different things. They may have just moved. Who knows? We just
right,
don't know
right,
exactly what happened. We know what we did. We just don't
hmm,
know exactly, what happened and why the recovery is taking so long. So it's better to I always say it's better to treat the problem while they're still here and sort of protect than it is to rebuild, because that's
yeah,
always the hardest case and the more expensive,
oh yes,
case.
yeah, exponentially so. Yes, yes,
Now we have sort of industry wide problems, but then on the consumer side, there's a huge part of the consumer side. People love seafood. Most people love seafood. I'm not going to say
mhm,
everybody does, but most people love seafood, and we see it in a variety of different ways. We see it from restaurants and fish markets, like where you see the raw fish in front of you, you see the whole fish and that kind of stuff. But then you also see a lot of fish like processed products, so
hmm,
fish sticks and
hmm,
fish and chips and all that kind of stuff. Um, and then other things that we see, like just different sort of prepared meals or frozen meals that we see in our Costco's or in grocery stores and things like that. From the consumer side, people, I would say, for the most part, don't know essentially how to choose what's sustainable and what's not.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that there's a good group of people who would use like a seafood watch app or who use something like that to be able to find it. But then there's not a lot of information
right,
that's given out to those consumers to make a better decision, to make that
hmm,
that best decision. Um, from the alliance point of view, do you have projects, sort of targeting consumers or helping consumers with that and the industry to sort of hit a middle ground? Let's start with that, and then we'll just kind of go from there if that's okay.
yeah. No, we don't. We work more directly with industry.
Gotcha.
Our members do, and we often have, um, Seafood Watch, Ocean Wise are of course members, and so when they present on their consumer-facing research, that happens. So there is a bit of support in that way, but we do not do direct consumer
Gotcha.
outreach. But having done that job for so long at Seafood Watch, I do have a great deal of empathy for seafood consumers.
Mhm.
Just to add, I agree with everything you said, and I would add that at least in the United States, as soon as a fish is processed, the amount of information you have to share goes. Like if it's breaded pollock, the country of origin is where it was processed. That fish could be from anywhere. And
Ah,
so that level of processing, that's why you can have, Alaskan wild caught seafood from China.
right.
Just these things that don't seem to make
They
any
make
sense
no
at all on the
sense.
surface. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then there's
yeah,
the fish nomenclature, like what do you call a fish? Like what is a
yeah,
snapper?
yeah.
What do any of these things mean? So yeah, it's very, very complicated for the consumer. And we had the opportunity to just chat briefly before this call. And I do think that the solutions for a consumer aren't all there. Again, there's no panacea for it. I wish there was. I wish you could just do these things. But the couple things that, when people always say, what would you tell your mom? And luckily my mom's a very savvy shopper. So I say, look for certification. It's
Yeah,
not perfect, but it's great.
yeah, it
If you can
helps.
find it, it helps. It also doesn't cover most of the seafood out there. So that's just a start. Look for local seafood for the reasons we discussed. It's not a
Mhm,
guarantee of sustainability, but it is an opportunity for a conversation in many cases.
mhm.
Um, Something you said, and I'm going to steal, is when you're talking to your wait staff, if they can't answer the questions you have, very simple stuff. What kind of fish is it? Where was
Yeah,
it caught? How was it caught? Very simple stuff. I mean, you would expect them to know that about your wine. You would expect them to
yeah,
know that about your beef if you're paying those types of prices. They should know about your seafood. And if they don't know, then choose something else. That's a perfectly valid response. And
yep.
I think that while that isn't necessarily going to take you to a sustainable option, it is going to put you on the right side of the conversation.
Yeah, and I would say to that side too, if a restaurant or a supermarket or even a fish market knows where it's come from, I would say share the heck out of that.
Yep.
With like on your social media, be like, "Hey, I just had a great experience with said restaurant or said fish market or said grocery store where this person around the corner or behind the counter knew exactly how this fish was caught, how this it's an opportunity to sort of promote that company, right? To
Mm.
say, hey, they're doing some really great things. I always focus on the negative, but I've just as you were mentioning, I'm like, oh well, if they do know, in the rare case that they do know, it's like promote the heck out of that shop or that person and say, hey,
Yeah.
this person knows their stuff, and I feel very comfortable, buying seafood from that
Yes.
if the information is right. So I think that's
Yes.
also a good thing. Now, we've heard a lot over the last little bit, last few years, number of years, about seafood fraud.
Hmm.
Where the fish that you buy or you think you buy that you pay for is not necessarily the fish that you think. So, in other words, some examples that I've read about. Red snapper, it's a white fish. Sometimes it's tilapia, which is sort of a
Hmm.
freshwater fish, but it's very difficult to tell the difference if you're not savvy in that case.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the other one is like I think it's like some type of tuna, but it's a shark. I think that's
Yeah.
the other one that I've heard quite a bit. But it's pretty rampant. Some of the Oceana did a study in New York and in Toronto and Vancouver, and it was like I think some of the numbers were up to 48%
Yep.
that were fraudulent and that they surveyed. That's a scary number,
It
and
really
it's
is.
not necessarily the fault of the retailer. It kind of does it go back to the supply chain and how many people sort of have their hands on that fish before it gets to the final retailer and eventually the consumer.
Yeah, I'd say yes. Yes. I mean, that's what allows for it, right? That's why you can make those switches. If it was a perfectly transparent supply chain, you wouldn't have the opportunity for that type of activity. So,
Yeah,
in that sense, it's certainly related. And if they can save money by providing one fish, or if they're asked to provide a fish that they can't, and they need to make a last minute change and choose to be dishonest about that,
right.
there's space for that type of manipulation and that type of fraudulent sales. Um, Again, not there. Again, to people who might want to be in this industry, Oceania was literally across they were the door. I could throw a ball out the Seafood Watch window and hit the Oceania office, and they were working on that report. So that was really cool.
Yeah,
It's a very
yeah,
tight knit community. So
for sure.
if you join us, you'll know us. It's all interwoven, and that is a big problem. And my personal belief is that we need organizations like Oceania and others to continue their pressure. It's so that
Yeah.
I can talk about seafood sustainability, and frankly, if I'm not talking to a group of people like your listeners,
Hmm.
people's eyes they just
Yeah.
glaze over. Seafood is such a small part of most people's shopping that
Yes.
they don't have and I get it. We're all
Yep.
busy. We've got kids, we've got lives, we've got jobs. Where my sea bass came from, if I don't even know how to ask the questions, or if the guy I'm buying it from doesn't know how to answer the questions, it feels like a non-starter.
Right.
But Oceania, they release an article like that, it gets people's attention. So that needs to continue to happen. We need to continue to push. And so
Yeah.
they're doing the good work. And then we need regulation. And at the end
Yes.
of the day, most of these problems come back
It's
to that really strong regulation.
yeah.
And at some point, acknowledgement that our seafood is probably going to need to cost more than it does now, which has
Right.
all sorts of ramifications as well. But
Yeah. Well, and you being in policy,
mhm,
I've always told people if you don't like what you see or the policies that you do, obviously vote. That's a big thing. But
yes.
also, whoever's in your office, no matter what party they're from, have a relationship or try and build a relationship with your local, your state or provincial, and your federal representatives.
Hmm.
Um, is it better to do that or to support a place like Oceania or another organization like Ocean Conservancy or other organizations that put
Oh,
pressure, or is it a little bit of both? Right, like there's still like
yeah.
a two pronged approach too, right?
I think it's the latter. I think you need, doing both is wonderful.
Yeah,
I just had this conversation with my father. He said, should I go with WWF or the Stowe Society? Because
right.
he makes donation. I said, go with whatever your heart tells you.
Yeah,
Pick a team. It's just like professional sports, right? They're all
right.
doing the good work.
Yeah,
You can look online and get their NGO rating and see how good of a job they're doing and make sure it's not
true.
a sham. And once you trust that they're doing the good work, find the one you like and support them, because they're all out there doing good things. Every,
Yeah,
every group we've mentioned on this call
yeah,
is doing wonderful things. And they certainly need your support. But I think it's both. If you have the
yeah,
money, do it. If you can become a member, some of these groups have memberships
yeah,
that don't cost money. I believe Ocean Wise does, but you'll know
yeah,
better than I possibly.
yeah.
Seafood Watch, of course, does. Follow them on social media, um, and support the businesses that make commitments by buying your seafood there.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, over the last, I guess the pandemic really highlighted this for me was the straight to fisher sort of purchase of fish. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if that's what you call it. Sometimes it's community fishing shares as
Yep.
well,
Yep.
where you can support people who are going out and fishing. So as an example, there are some places where you can go on the website, you spend like, I think you get shares, so you spend like say $200 a year, then
Yeah.
you can buy, you put in your order, they'll go out and get it, like literally in the ocean, and then
Hmm.
coming back, and then they'll sell it to you, they'll ship it to you. Are those legitimate ways of sort of supporting solutions for seafood, where you're kind of cutting out the middle person, you're
Yeah.
supporting artisanal fishers, and it's is it contributing less to overfishing in sort of a way?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's no guarantee, as we've talked about with local fishing, that local doesn't. I mean, I grew up on the Great Lakes, right? Surrounded by refineries and car factories, and none of those things are sustainable, but they were local. And so your fishery isn't necessarily good just because it's local, but it
Right.
is. There's much more transparency. You can have those conversations,
Yeah.
and so it is a great place to start. I'd say
Okay.
another sort of, depending on how the model works, and many of these, they're going to go out and catch fish. Sometimes, as you say, they'll catch what you want, and other times they'll say, "Hey, this is what we caught.
Right.
Here's how to use it."
Yeah.
And so many of us don't know how to cook fish anymore. It's You'd be amazed the number of Japanese people who don't. As an example, many
Interesting.
supermarkets in Japan don't even sell fish anymore, unless it's already been pre-cut for sushi, because no one knows how to make it. And so, getting these different
Interesting.
species and getting us away
Yeah.
from, I mean, I think I'd struggle to name 7 terrestrial species that we consume as a species, as a humans. There are hundreds, if not maybe close thousands of species we consume from the ocean. And so, to get outside of shrimp, salmon, tuna,
Hmm.
cod, if you can get outside of that and try something
Yeah.
new, then you're really starting to experiment with what sustainability can be. There's some really good fish out there.
Yeah, and one thing I would do is look at your local aquarium. If you live near an aquarium, sometimes they have programs like that. A friend of
Yep.
mine that also has a podcast called Fish Nerds. Uh, he was a part of part of the New England Aquarium project
Mm,
where they would send him local fish and local seafood, and they would like give him, or they would send him. Sorry, they would send him items to go purchase. He would go purchase those and be local, and he would go and ask, and he would sort of like, it was almost like a catch per unit effort. How much effort did you have to do just to find them in your local grocery store or
right.
your local fish market, and then cook them and eat them and see how you like them? Because a lot of it was, sometimes it was like grunts or something that you wouldn't
You're right.
expect,
Right.
and he would try them. He's like, yeah, they're perfectly good. It was a really cool study to be a part of. So sometimes, not often, but sometimes they have those studies and you can participate in that. So check that out as well. But
Yeah, absolutely.
um, yeah, I think this is really great. Ryan, is there anything that we missed that you'd like to sort of highlight that the Alliance would do, or is there any big sort of items that we should look out for the Alliance, other than going to the website and just sort of getting to know the organization?
No, I would say first off, thank you. This has been excellent. I would
You
say
bet.
if you're interested in the space and you want to know more, bring more skills, bring another language, engage with your local. If it's the New England Aquarium, which by the way is one of our members, engage
Nice.
with them. Right, those are great
Yeah.
places to start. Um, and we do need more voices, different voices at the table. This problem is not going to solve itself during my career.
Yeah.
Before I someday am allowed to retire, and so we do need new and more faces at the table. So
Yeah.
I would strongly suggest that if your membership is interested in this stuff, yeah, contact us through the site. And just thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate you sitting down with us and explaining all of this. I think it'll be good to maybe invite you back to be able to get
Love
updates
to.
on what you're working on and sort of what we should know about the seafood industry. I think there's a lot of interesting things that happen every once in a while. There was a documentary called Seaspiracy that happened a couple of years ago during the pandemic that really kind of threw a lot of us through for a loop in terms of who knows the seafood industry and some of the things they got
Yep.
right, but a lot that they got wrong.
Yep.
And so it's good to get this kind of information out there, to talk about, to be transparent, talk about, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the industry, but also like the steps that we're taking to make the industry better. So I totally agree. I'd love to see more podcasts on this to
Yeah.
talk more about seafood and the seafood industry and the transparency of that. And I think that'd be really great. But we really appreciate you coming on the podcast and love to have you back.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on to talk about all things seafood. I told you guys, I told you, everybody, that this is the episode for seafood that you want to listen to. We're going to have Ryan back. I've invited him back on to talk about more things, as well as people from the Alliance to talk about seafood topics that he thinks that we should be interested in and that we should be listening to, and find out what we can do to sort of live for a better ocean through seafood purchasing and through just knowing what types of projects are going on within the seafood industry, and how conservation is being treated from a policy perspective, also from an action perspective. I think that's the biggest thing. We talk about policy, we talk about industry wanting to be more sustainable, but we never really talk about the actions that happen, or very, very seldomly do we do so. So Ryan's going to come back and he'll bring some friends, he'll bring some colleagues, and we're going to talk all things seafood in the future. But I just thought this interview was really interesting, and I want to thank him for reaching out, and the Alliance for reaching out to be on the podcast, to be able to share his information with, on seafood conservation and what's needed and where we're at. Obviously, a lot of work that needs to be done, but we're getting there. Just by talking about it and just by getting through some of these, having the Alliance and talking to businesses about some of these topics and some of these issues that we're facing, and having them face it themselves, as well as like them coming to the table wanting to face it. I think that's really, really important. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. I'm going to put the seafood for solutions for seafood.com website in the show notes, so you can check that out. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can do so. Go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. You get a newsletter every single day of the weekday, Monday to Friday. Get updated on news that's coming out that you may not have heard before. You get jobs advertisements if you're interested to work in the industry. free. And you get updates on our latest podcast episodes that we publish Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.